Boundless Authenticity Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Boundless Authenticity Podcast. Remember that if you like what you hear, you can find it on Spreaker, Spotify, Apple, and Rumble, because of course, YouTube does not like me anymore. But I have a special guest today. I'm actually quite excited. Robert Bitto. For many decades, I won't say how many, because the man looks like a young man, Robert Bitto has walked the borderlands between history, culture, and the unexplained. From his days as a student and professional researcher in Mexico, to running his own Latin American imports business, to leading Mensa in San Diego, Robert has dedicated life to uncovering truths that are hidden just beneath the surface. He's written about miracles, monsters, and the mysteries that most people are too afraid to confront. But tonight, he's gonna laser focus his sharp eye and trained mind to one of humanity's greatest enigmas, UFOs. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for that very generous introduction.
Well, I tried to make it as good as I could, because I've been through your website and I was like, wow, what do I say about this guy? This is a phenomenal body of work that you've compiled. How'd you even get started with that?
Well, that's an interesting story. I have owned an imports business since 1999. And so next month, actually in a few weeks, I'll be celebrating 26 years in business. And when I go down to Mexico and other Latin American countries, I always seem to be running into stories or, like legends or things are going on around me that are kind of strange. And one day when I was flying back to the States, I was settling in my airplane seat with a magazine called Muy Interesante. And that means very interesting in Spanish. And it's a paranormal magazine. And I was flipping through it and I saw an article about Mexican crop circles. And I thought, well, crop circles in Mexico? I thought they were just in England and in the United States, in cornfields and stuff. And then I started to think, there's a lot of stuff, paranormal stuff, UFO sightings, crash sites, landing sites, cryptids, stories about monsters and things like that, that people in the United States or in the broader English-speaking world, they don't know about, okay? So I decided to start Mexico Unexplained back in 2016, the early part of 2016. And I've been doing it now for, it's almost going to be 10 years now. So, I've had 420 full-length shows and something like 600 shorts. You got to get that short attention span thing in there for the young ones these days. And so, I have, like you said, there's a lot of material on my website, and there is a never-ending supply of material. I could keep going with this for 40 more years or whatever and never exhaust the material that's down there. Because a lot of it hasn't come out of Mexico, and some of it even hasn't come out of the region of Mexico where it originates. So, there is a lot to talk about. So it's really up to the host of the show to point me in the direction, and, we can go wherever you want to go and I can take it from there.
Well, Robert, what's coming to mind for me is, why do you think that, as opposed to, say, the United States and the UK, the Spanish-speaking countries of the world tend to have so much more documented studies, to put it that way, or sightings?
Well, I think with regard to Mexico, the Spanish, when they arrived there, they encountered full-fledged advanced civilizations that had writing systems. And then they also uncovered, and were still uncovering, ancient civilizations in Mexico that had writing systems. So there were living, breathing civilizations at the time of Spanish contact that had history dating back thousands of years, unbroken history. And so in those thousands of years, you have lots of legends, you have lots of different anomalies, all these different stories, multiple gods. And so there is a lot of material just based on this cultural continuity. We don't really know what was happening in North America to a large extent, like in Canada or the US, let's say 1200 AD. There's some space here and there, there are some archaeological, like in the Southwest, the Anasazi people or Cahokia, the mound builders in the central part of the US, but everything else is pretty much blank. But with Mexico, you have tons of stuff to go through. And like I said, a lot of these civilizations had writing that we can read what they wrote, in 1200 AD. And so there's a lot of material down there. And then, like I said, there's just a lot in modern Mexico to be uncovered, like local legends, local creatures, a lot of different anomalies and things like that. And like I said, most people in the United States have never heard of any of this stuff. They're unaware that, for example, there are 2 Mexican Bigfoot creatures. There's a Loch Ness monster type creature, all of like the paranormal things that you hear that are famous, there's a Mexican counterpart. There's also like a dogman creature, what else? Vampires, witches, all of this stuff. And a Bermuda Triangle too. There's an area of anomalies. The Mapimi ecological zone is called the Zone of Silence. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff down there. And like I said, not much. Before I started doing this, there wasn't much coming out of that country. So now, I'm bringing it forth to the English-speaking world, and it's been fun. I've had a good time. And now when I go on buying trips, when I go down to Mexico, I make it a point, because I still go on trips, I make a point to ask locals, is there a creature? Was there a UFO landing? Whatever, are there ghost stories? And I found that more people now are talking about this stuff. Whereas before, like when I first started, 25 years ago, 26 years ago, people were not very apt to talk about seeing ghosts or aliens or the creature that lives in the cave outside of town. They didn't want to talk to people about stuff like that. So now I think the atmosphere is more relaxed to talk about stuff. And there's a lot of stuff apparently to talk about.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Have you personally had any experiences?
Well, you know what? There's a story that I tell a lot of people that, in Mexico, I almost went to a landing site of a flying saucer, supposedly. I was on a buying trip and I was in the back country of a state called Michoacan. And I always have drivers who take me around. I hire drivers with trucks, and then we load up the back of the truck with arts and crafts and things like that. And then, take them back to the big city and have them palletized and shipped. So I was out in the backcountry with this driver, and we were in this little town, and we heard that there was a flying saucer landing site in a cornfield. And I was all excited to go and see it. But the driver told me no, he wasn't going to take me there, because he was afraid of the radiation. And the guy in whose field supposedly the flying saucer landed was charging like 25 pesos or something for people to go out there. I told the guy, I said, I'll pay for your admission price. And he was like, no, I'm afraid of the radiation. But one of the big stories in Mexico, that was an in-country kind of story. There's a legend in Mexico that goes into the American Southwest, the legend of La Llorona, the weeping woman. And I grew up in the state of New Mexico in the American Southwest. And when I was a little kid, I thought I saw the Llorona. I thought I saw this ditch witch. And the story about her, I don't know if you've ever heard that's the story of La Llorona before.
I've never heard of it, but do tell me.
Okay. It's a woman who was beautiful. She married some handsome man. In some stories, he was a nobleman. In other stories, he was in the military, and he was away from home a lot. And the pretty young wife heard that he was having affairs behind her back and all this stuff. And so to get back at him, she took her two kids and went to the river and threw them into the river to drown the kids, okay, to spite the husband for cheating on her. And then while the kids were in the river, drowning, she had second thoughts and tried to save them, but the current was too fast. Okay. So the kids drowned, and the story goes, the Llorona now roams the sides of rivers and arroyos, dry stream beds. Those are arroyos in the Southwest US. She roams these areas looking for kids to snatch. Okay. And so it's a cautionary tale. Like I said, I grew up in the Southwest US in New Mexico, and it can be raining like 20 miles away, and it could be sunny where you are, and you could be in an arroyo in a dry stream bed and then have a ton of water just rush down at like a flash flood through the dry creek bed. So some people say that this is a story told to children to keep them out of the arroyos, to keep them out of the ditches so that they don't get washed away by flash floods. But when I was a little kid, we were going to teacher's house and for a swim party. And because New Mexico is so poor, there wasn't enough money for a school bus. So we had to take the city bus to get to her house. We had to change buses. And in one point, we had to cross over a bridge over the Han Arroyo. That was the name of it, Han. We had to cross over the bridge of that arroyo. And when we were crossing, we saw an old lady in the ditch climbing up the side of the ditch. And some kid yelled and he goes, "Look, it's the Llorona, it's the Llorona." And then we all looked, we all saw her. And then we all ran. We ran as fast as we could. We were laughing. We stumbled over each other and everything. And that was the sighting that I've had. But there's some weird connections with this. Okay. Now, there was a movie about the Llorona a few years back. And I went to go see it in the movie theaters because I was all jazzed that they were making a movie about this story that I had some connection with. And when I'm sitting in the movie theater, I'm looking up at the screen, and within the first few scenes, I see some of my merchandise that only I carry with my business. Some of my merchandise was on the set or in the movie. And I was like, how in the heck, what the hell? Those are things that I only make. I have a person making those things, these metal charms for me, only for me. And then I remembered that about 9 months before, I got a major order from Burbank, California, one of the studios, for a movie tentatively called The Children. Okay. And I remembered I'd sent that up there, because I have orders coming at, leaving here all the time and everything. And I was like, what? And in the other scenes of the movie, there were more of my stuff. And it was definitely my stuff because some of these designs are my own exclusive designs. And like I said, I remembered sending a bunch of these pieces to a movie studio. So I'm sitting in this movie and it's like, it comes full circle, but it even gets better than that. Okay. So I moved from California to Nebraska, a small town in western Nebraska, just 10 weeks ago. And the street that I live on is called Han, which was the name of the arroyo that I saw the Llorona in New Mexico. More than 30, a long time ago, many decades ago, to use your phrasing from the beginning of the show, many years ago. So that's my connection. I know that was a long story, but hopefully your audience found it interesting. But that's one of my big connections to the legends or creatures or anything that I study. That's a really big connection, actually.
I love that story. I love stories. Tell me more. I mean, my next most obvious question would have to be, have you ever felt like your passion for this is being guided by an extraterrestrial or interdimensional presence?
Well, no, not really. I never thought of it. Well, when you create things, if you're a creative person, most creative people feel like there's some other agency involved. Where do you get your ideas from? You can ask a painter, you could ask a writer, you could ask a musician. And most of the time, they're not going to say, "Oh, it's all me, dude. I'm just so talented," or whatever. It's like things come to me or whatever. So I don't know if you would call that guidance from some other source, but as when you're creating things, there's something external to you, I think. I don't know. But I just keep going with this. I did quit for a while, for 5 months. In fact, I have a video up there that's still up there, why I quit YouTube 8.5 years as a content creator, whatever. And because I got kind of burned out about like the algorithm and all of that stuff. You said at the beginning that YouTube was not your friend. Well, I think if you have 2 million subscribers, then YouTube's your friend. Otherwise, YouTube isn't your friend, It seems like it favors people over others because I've been slogging through this for almost 10 years. You take that 5-month break aside and, I've been working pretty hard on this. Each episode takes about 8 hours to produce and they're only 15 minutes long, and I'm consistent and I do all the things the gurus say you should do.